Welcome back to Bible Basics for New Believers. My name is Ray Helwig. Today we will continue talking about the Intertestamental Period. So when we leave the Old Testament, the Jews are under the rule of the Persians. That would occur and remain the same for about the first 100 years of this 400-year period. This will be basically a good time for the Jews. There will be not much conflict occurring. One of the things that prominently happens during this period is that the Persians will allow the Samaritans to build a temple at Mount Gerizim. As we remember from our past history, the Samaritans were the northern kingdom, and they were destroyed by the Assyrians. In that destruction, Assyria would move the peoples around, so many people from different countries were settled into Samaria. The conflict that had already existed between the northern and southern kingdom was exacerbated because the people would then intermarry, and the people of the southern kingdom would see them as half-breeds. The Samaritans were also those who opposed the Jews when they returned from exile from rebuilding Jerusalem and the temple. And thus, when the Persians allowed the Samaritans to build the temple themselves, this was an extra source of irritation between the two. During this 100-year period, Greece would rise in power, and this would be the time of Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. Philip II of Macedonia would become ruler of Greece and start a campaign against Persia, which his son Alexander the Great would complete. Alexander would extend the Greek Empire to include all the areas of the first four major powers, Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, and Persia, and go beyond that, even all the way to India. Alexander was a student of Aristotle, and his way of dealing with conquered peoples was much different than that of Assyria and Babylon, where they tried to force their power upon those nations they conquered. Alexander tried to bring Greek culture and Greek thought to the whole world. This process is known as Hellenization. Hellenization is actually the basis for all of Western culture. Although Alexander would rule only for 10 years over Israel, the influence of Hellenism would completely change the nation. So here are a couple of examples. Let's look at Acts 6:1. Now in the days when the disciples were increasing in number, a complaint by the Hellenists arose against the Hebrews because their widows were being neglected in the daily distribution. The first conflict in the church is between Hellenistic Jews and non-Hellenistic Jews. And we read again, Romans 10:12, where there is no distinction between Jew and Greek, for the same Lord is Lord of all, bestowing his riches on all who call on him. Colossians 3:11, here there is not Greek and Jew, circumcised and uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave, free, but Christ is all and in all. The point we're making here, although the Jews in the New Testament are under the rule of Rome, we see the distinctions Paul makes is not about the Romans and the Jews, but the Greeks and the Jews, because the Greeks had such great influence upon the Jewish culture. After the death of Alexander, he splits his kingdom between his four generals. Two of those are important to us, Ptolemy and Seleucid. Ptolemy would be given Egypt and the surrounding area. Seleucid would be given Syria and the surrounding area. And the nation of Israel would be right between the two of them. If you look at maps Sometimes this area between the two of them is known as Palestine, but that is the nation of Israel. Initially, Palestine would fall under the rule of the Ptolemies, and this would be a peaceful time for the most part. Although they would continue the Hellenization process, it was done without much force. They would rule for about 80 years. And significant during their rule would be that the Hebrew Old Testament would be translated into Greek. And that translation is known as the Septuagint. Jesus, during his ministry, will quote about 90% of the time from the Greek Septuagint rather than the Hebrew Old Testament. The reason being is that most of the Hebrews at that time did not know their own language and were more fluent in Greek. Sometimes when we see Old Testament quotes in the New Testament, they are slightly different. That is because English translators translate out of the original Hebrew scriptures and not the Septuagint. This also gives us confidence that translations are acceptable. Jesus is not primarily quoting from the Hebrew Old Testament, but a translation of that Old Testament, the Septuagint. After that 80 years, a ruler arises among the Seleucids, a Seleucid king, Antiochus the Great, and he takes the land of Palestine, or the Jewish nation, away from the Ptolemies. They would rule over the nation for the next 60 years. And they were much more aggressive in the Hellenization process. At this point, the priests who had been the go-betweens between the people and the conquerors would be formed into a formal assembly which would become the Sanhedrin. The original assembly would be composed mainly of the priesthood and the aristocracy, with a few sprinklings of scribes. When Antiochus the Great dies, his son Antiochus IV, or also known as Antiochus Epiphanes, aggressively seeks to extend Hellenism by eradicating all the practices of Judaism. For example, he steals furniture from the temple, tears down the walls of Jerusalem, removes the high priest, and puts in his political appointee. He bans circumcision under penalty of death, and finally offers a sow on the altar and erects a statue of Jupiter in the temple. This is a partial fulfillment of the prophecy in Daniel 9:27, and which Christ refers to in Matthew 24:15. These policies are continued throughout a succession of Seleucid kings. One of the priests, Mattathias, and especially his son, Judas Maccabee, revolt against this Hellenization by the Seleucid kings and are able to win freedom for the nation of Israel. This freedom will exist for approximately 100 years. Judas Maccabee will rededicate the temple, and this will become the Feast of Lights, today known as Hanukkah, and is recorded also in John 10. The Maccabees were obviously anti-Hellenists. During their time, the Hellenists and the anti-Hellenists, which had started all the way back from Alexander the Great, would develop into two parties. The Hellenists would be the Sadducees and would contain most of the aristocracy and the priesthood. The anti-Hellenists would become the Pharisees, would include most of the scribes and the common people. While the Pharisees would dominate the period early on, later on there would be great dissension between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, which would result in a civil war. At the time of this civil war, Rome is rising in power and fighting against Greece. Now we see Antipater, who is an Idumean, who is a descendant of Esau, as governor of the province of Idumea, which is south of Judea. He wants to curry favor with the Romans and asks Pompey, the Roman general, to intervene in the civil war in Judea. In 64 BC, Rome conquers Greece. And in 63 BC, Pompey conquers Jerusalem and Judea. Antipater, because of his good relationship with Rome, is given power over all of Palestine, which includes Judea. Antipater becomes the head of the Herodian dynasty, who will rule over this area through the majority of the New Testament. This is the time of Julius Caesar and Marc Antony, where the powers of Rome are fighting over being a republic or a monarchy. The monarchy wins out, and Octavius is named first Caesar and is renamed Caesar Augustus. So now we read in Luke 2:1. In those days a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. Rome would play a big part in the development of the gospel in two other ways. Because of the need to move their armies quickly, they built a tremendous road system. Also because of that army, they were able to maintain peace throughout the whole empire. This time was known as Pax Romana. This peace and these roads would make it very conducive for the gospel to be spread quickly. Now we're going to take a look at the Herodian dynasty, which were the rulers of Palestine during the time of the New Testament. First, we want to look at Herod the Great. Herod the Great was responsible for restoring the temple to its former glory as it was in the time of Solomon. He did this to curry favor with the people. He is also the Herod that is present when the Magi come to Jerusalem looking for the king. He is also the Herod that puts out the decree to kill all the male children in Bethlehem under 2 years old to ensure that no king will rise in power over him. He has 4 sons, and his kingdom will be divided among them. 2 of them are important to us. The first would be Herod Antipas. He is given control over Galilee, and he will be the one that will behead John the Baptist. Not only will he behead John the Baptist, but he will be the Herod in charge of Jesus' trial, which takes place in Luke 23. His son, Herod Agrippa I, is the Herod that persecutes the church in Jerusalem, recorded in Acts 12. He kills James, the brother of the Apostle John, who becomes the first martyr of the church. Because of his blasphemy, God punishes him by having him be eaten alive by worms. All of this occurs in Acts 12. And that is the Herodian dynasty. We want to make one last mention of the Roman Empire, and that is the Romans would start a tax collection system in which they would take members of the conquered people and have them collect taxes on behalf of Rome. They were given a certain amount to collect, and anything they collected above that, they would keep for their own. These tax collectors were considered to be dishonest and also traitors because they were collecting taxes from their own people. And when Jesus befriended them, he was criticized severely by the ruling Jewish leaders. That ends our discussion of the Intertestamental Period, and will conclude our first series of videos. These videos were recorded to give you more confidence and understanding in reading your Bible. If you want to check out more of these videos, there is a link below that you can click. We will be starting a second series with more in-depth material for those who want to continue on. So if you want to be notified when that series begins, subscribe to my channel now so that you don't miss it. And until then, God bless.